All right, happy Friday trade guide video. We're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, the best record as of Friday in the Western Conference, 32-13 Minnesota Timberwolves. After a not spectacular, but a win is a win, win in Brooklyn on Thursday night, and certainly coming off a back-to-back in Washington the night before. A nice bounce back after that demoralizing loss against the Charlotte Hornets at home a few nights before. Trade guides are up on ESPN.com. I think this might be the 15th or 16th trade guide video that we've done. You can find all of them on YouTube, in the ESPN or the ESPN NBA section here. We will do our best to try to get all 30 done. Some teams, as I've said before, have great length. Some teams are kind of like hitting, in that sitting position as far as, we like where our roster is right now. And I always joke and say there's only 437 players in the NBA, right? It's not like we're pulling from a pool of, 2,000 players and we want trades and all this stuff. Like, enjoy your roster. And I think if you're Minnesota, I think you can certainly enjoy as far as what you see. Now, the goalposts have changed, and you Timberwolves fans know that, as far as when you go from a team that's competing for a play-in spot, and now you're a team that's sitting on top of the Western Conference. Getting to the first round is not good enough anymore. Getting to 7 games in a first-round playoff series is not good enough anymore. And at the very least, you're getting to a second round, or you're getting to a conference finals, or perhaps you're getting to an NBA finals. Like, you losing a first round playoff series will have drastic consequences, perhaps, as far as where this roster goes. I think when you look at it, and we've got Minnesota up, as we do a trade meter for all teams. We have them as a 3 right now. And basically it's a 3 because when you look at where their roster is, it's certainly top heavy. Gobert's not going anywhere. Cat's not going anywhere. Mike Conley's not going anywhere. Anthony Edwards and certainly Jaden McDaniels aren't going anywhere. Those 2 players signed rookie extension. Naz Reid. And then it's basically kind of a process of elimination as far as who your trade assets are here. You've got an expiring contract of Kyle Anderson at $9.2 million, but is a valuable bench player. You've got Nickeil Alexander at 4.7, who's got a non-guarantee, who's got under contract for next year, not a $4.3 million straight contract, who has provided some depth as far as with the Conley in and out of the roster. And then you have a group of players that consist of certainly Troy Brown and Shake Milton. Milton's at a $5 million contract, non-guaranteed next year. Same with Brown, $4 million. A $4 million non-guarantee next year, and then all your young players: Wendell Moore, Josh Minott, Jordan McLaughlin, as far as not really a young player, but on an expiring contract, and then Leonard Miller, who's your developmental project here. So for you to go out and you watch that Charlotte game, that's the game Conley didn't play, and you basically have Anthony Edwards playing de facto point guard here. The offense kind of stagnated. Now, was that part of trying to get Cat to score 100 points and basically force-feeding him down the road? But for me, when I look at this roster, what can I get as far as what we have from a trade asset standpoint? So you got to look at the contracts first, as far as from a salary standpoint. For me, and I know Minnesota fans would crave at this, would be Tyus Jones, right? How do you get Minnesota's favorite son back to the Timberwolves as far as from a contract standpoint here? And it's basically stacking contracts. So let's say you take out Kyle Anderson because he's too valuable for a guy coming off your bench, certainly a big wing. Now you're stacking contracts where it's basically Brown, Milton, and let's say Jordan McLaughlin. I'm just hypothetical. So it's a 3-for-1 deal. Now you got to create a roster spot in Washington. And here's the other thing too with Minnesota, where you are at luxury tax wise, you're at $2.3 million in a luxury tax. So the goal is not to go over that amount. So it's hard for you to go out and get a $14-15 million player because you're so top heavy in contracts, and then you're not trading Anthony Edwards and you're not trading Jaden McDaniels, who's on a rookie, who are on these poison pill provisions in there. You're not trading Nas Reed. So we basically are eliminating players here. And it comes down to Milton, Brown, and, you know, McLaughlin. And then that puts you in the luxury tax unless you're finding a third team to kind of shift, you know, one of those players to, or maybe you keep on adding. So keep an eye on the luxury tax, which is at $2.3 million. The distribution for all those teams under are at about around $11-12 million. It's a high number as far as what teams are going to get. Here's the other thing to keep an eye on too, and it's really more for the offseason here, is going to be all these different rules as far as the apron and the first apron and the second apron, and it's going to have an impact as far as it relates to Minnesota here. And why I say that is because you are going to have players like Brown and Milton who are on non-guaranteed contracts. You trade those guys for, let's say, an expiring contract, and then you let that player walk. Now you're replacing those players with players on a minimum contract. Next year, Minnesota has $174 million in guaranteed contracts. Okay, that's with all the Cat Supermax kicking in, McDaniels and Edwards extensions kicking in. The luxury tax is at $172. So you're already a tax team. Okay, now you add that $11 million of non-guaranteed contracts of Milton and Brown in, and that gets you to $185.6. Okay. The first apron, okay, and this doesn't include Mike Conley, okay, who is a free agent. So you got to take that into consideration too. The first apron is at $179.3. You are already $6 million over the first apron, and that does not include Mike Conley here. So when you're looking at it, is that you're over the first apron. You have Mike Conley as far as that the unrestricted free agent, and you're going to be dealing with all these different roster restrictions as far as you can't take back more money in a trade. You know the buyout rules stay in effect here. You know you still have your tax mid-level, but you're right up against your second apron here. So the rules are going to come into effect and kind of bite this team a little bit in the butt here. Now you're looking at let's say the second apron here. Second apron is at 190, okay, 190.3. You're $4.6 million under the second apron before you address Mike Conley. So you bring back Conley, you're going to be a second apron team, Minnesota. And I think that's the realization as far as what happens when you sign those guys to extensions. So what does it mean from a second apron? Second apron, you can't go out and aggregate contracts. You can't combine money in a trade to trade out. If you have trade exceptions, those go away. You can't send cash in a deal. You can't you sign a player bought out of his contract who earned more than the non-tax mid-level exception. If you finish, if you finish the 2024-25 season over the second apron, your draft pick, first round pick in 2032 now becomes frozen. So there's all these different ways as far as how these roster restrictions are going to impact you here. And that's why if you're moving off guys that are on these $4 or $5 million contracts, for a player that, let's say Tyus Jones, I'm just throwing that name out there, it becomes awfully challenging because now you're basically going to have to re-sign Jones to $17, $18 million. You're still going to be a second apron team. You don't have Conley, and it just creates all these different problems here. But for me, when I look at it, we do trades we'd like to see for every team here. Here's a trade: McLaughlin, Mina, in the 2030 to Sacramento for Davion Mitchell, and Mitchell all of a sudden is back in the Sacramento rotation. He had been out of it. But you're limited as far as what you can, as I said, in contracts, as far as you've got a $3.7 million trade exception that is about to go away. You still have $7 million in cash, but your cash is going to get frozen in the offseason. You're not going to be able to use cash to go out and buy a draft pick here. They're not allowed to trade a first, but can trade swap rights in 24, 28, and 30. They've got they owe Utah. We know the picks: 25 and 27, protected in 29. They'll have their first come the night of the draft, which is in 2000. This upcoming draft here, but you can't do anything. You can certainly move off that. in come June as far as, but you can't touch that right now. So that could be an asset for you. And you've got 4 seconds available on a trade. So there's not much there as far as from a draft equity standpoint outside of swaps in those years, 24, 28, and 30. You've got, those 4 seconds. So that's it from the draft standpoint. You're $2.4 million under the luxury tax. As I said, you're below the first apron, which has been triggered because you are a hard cap team. And then the contracts, outside of your core guys, it's Milton, it's Brown. I don't see Alexander Walker, certainly not Naz Reid. I wouldn't do anything with Kyle Anderson right now, but what can you get for a $9 million combined salary here and not take back $2.4 million and go into the luxury tax? So that's it for Minnesota as far as in a nutshell. And I just want to kind of just give you the periphery as far as where they're looking at, certainly right now, and certainly as far as where they're going to be looking at come this offseason here. But I give Tim Connolly, their head of basketball operations, GM, a ton of credit for the patience, right? The patience of, a lot of bow and arrows coming at him last year with the Gobert trade. They lose in the first round to Denver in a really good series. Everyone's saying, Cat's going to be the guy, the next guy out. Cat's having a great year, potential All-Star. Gobert, potential All-Star year. Edwards will get named to the All-Star game. He stayed with his coach, Chris Finch, and has shown the patience there. So part of it is just patience and seeing where this roster is come playoff time. And then, of course, developing that again. So have a great Friday. We will talk soon. NBA on ESPN.